a feat matched by only one other cyclist in the race's 100-year history. This alone makes him a legend, but it is what happened in 1996 that makes Lance Armstrong a hero.
First words out of his mouth was, "This looks like cancer."
Those words seemed to spell the end of his career, and quite possibly his life.
There was a point there where I was like, well, am I going to be going to Lance's funeral?
In 2002, Lance Armstrong rode down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, wearing the winner's yellow jersey for the 4th time in a row, now on the verge of becoming the greatest cyclist in the history of the sport. But even as he approaches the pinnacle of his cycling career, Lance claims a far greater achievement.
I'm a cancer survivor, and that's my greatest passion in life, even greater than cycling.
In 1996, at a far more somber press conference, Lance shocked the cycling world when he announced that he was gravely ill.
On Wednesday, October 2nd, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer.
No one knew it at the time, but he was beginning a journey that would bring him within a whisper of death. And then, from there, through a painful rehabilitation that would lead him into the annals of sporting history.
And the biggest abnormality is this.
Lance had advanced testicular cancer, a rare cancer, but the one most common among men between the ages of 15 and 35. Successful treatment of it is contingent upon early detection. When Lance went to see his doctor, he had been experiencing swelling for nearly 3 months.
His cancer was very far advanced when it was first diagnosed, largely because Lance had a mass in his testicle, which he had for about 6 months. And Lance was very open about this. Like most 25, 26-year-old men, he had never heard of the words testicular cancer.
Like all cancers, testicular cancer is named after the organ or the type of cell in which the disease originates. What happens in any cancer is that normal cells don't die as they're programmed to do.
Only one cell goes wrong, and its daughters and their daughters and daughters and daughters all live indefinitely instead of dying, so they begin to take over the body. And then they spread to other places and start growing in those places and don't die there either. So that's what a tumor mass is.
For Lance, the situation was dire. Doctors soon discovered that the cancer in his testicle had spread to other parts of his body. X-rays and other tests revealed that the cancer had traveled to his abdomen and lungs as well as his brain.
Put the chest X-ray up on the light, and then first words out of his mouth was, "This looks like cancer." Yeah. But and of course I said, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Because I feel a little sick, but I don't. I've been riding well. I've been riding strong.
A more unlikely cancer victim would be hard to imagine. Lance had been the picture of health, vibrant and strong. Cycling was his life, and he regularly spent 6 to 8 hours a day on his bike, pushing his body to go faster and higher. In the early summer of 1996, months before Lance Armstrong was diagnosed with cancer, Lance and his coach were focused on making him only the second American in the history of the Tour de France to win the race. This young man from Austin, Texas, was voted U.S. Male Cyclist of the Year, and a French team, Cofidis, awarded him a multi-million-dollar contract, making Armstrong one of the highest-paid athletes in pro cycling. They were making a big bet that Lance Armstrong could bring Tour de France glory to their team. It appeared that Lance Armstrong was at the top of his game, but trouble was lurking.
He wasn't responding quite as well to his training program. I couldn't put my finger on it. We thought, both Lance and myself thought it was a virus, it was something like this.
I had subtle symptoms all year, but not anything that that really stood out or made me think I needed to go to the doctor. I mean, in hindsight, yeah, of course I should have gone, but at the time, it was easy to ignore. And only until, like I said, those last 2 weeks did I get symptoms that were so major that I knew something was wrong.
The signs and common symptoms of testicular cancer will be either pain or a mass in the testicle itself. When the cancer spreads through the lymph glands, it can cause back pain or flank pain on the same side as the cancer is, in the right or left testicle.
Haven't noticed any lumps or bumps or anything?
The first major symptom was a set of headaches I had, really serious headaches that couldn't be fixed with aspirin or ibuprofen, or nothing would make them go away. And, blurry vision, just a general bad feeling of flu-like symptoms, no energy.
Lance ignored his symptoms, accepting the pain as part of being a professional cyclist.
What happens in the real world is a patient will deny symptoms, or a patient will ignore symptoms, or a patient will not be educated to know that these symptoms may mean cancer.
But one morning in early October of 1996, Lance's body sent him a message he couldn't ignore.
I was in my living room when it came, or when it started. But I mean, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it was nonstop. I coughed, and I knew that something wasn't right, so I went to the bathroom and spit it in the sink, and then kept spitting in the sink. Kept on. Blood. Would have filled up a small glass. Pretty bad.
How you been doing?
Lance finally went to see a doctor,
Feeling well?
but he still could not believe his symptoms were the signs of any serious disease.
I've had a history of sinus problems my whole life, and he was looking kind of up in my mouth and in the backside of my throat, and it was kind of bloody up there, so I thought perhaps I had some cracked sinuses, or my sinuses were bleeding. And so even then really didn't go to the doctor for a major checkup. I mean, after that I thought, this is great, I got a sinus problem, no problem. I'll get over it.
But when Lance complained of soreness in his testicle a few days later, he discovered the truth. He had advanced testicular cancer. Doctors scheduled surgery for 7 a.m. the following morning in his hometown of Austin, Texas.
I was stunned. I called my agent, Bill Stapleton, on the way home, and told him, and at the time I drove this big, fast car, and I used to always drive fast, and I drove home so slow. I remember that. Really slow.
And he called, and I picked the phone up, and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine." And he said, "I've got some really bad news." And, I had no idea what was coming next. I just sort of thought, he just got a speeding ticket, something, I couldn't imagine what it could be, but he said, "I've got cancer, and I'm never going to ride my bike again." I didn't know what to say. I'd never had a friend tell me anything like that before. But he was really focused on, I'm never, ever going to ride again.
The next morning, Lance Armstrong was admitted to a local Austin hospital for surgery to remove the cancerous testicle. But it didn't end there. Next on Medical Profile.
It's actually in his abdomen, his lungs, it's in his brain. Come on, where is there a break here? Where is it going to stop?
You're watching Discovery Health Channel. Real life, medicine, miracles.
Cycling superstar Lance Armstrong had testicular cancer. If he had been aware of the symptoms and gone in for an examination earlier, his odds for survival would have been high.
Testicular cancer is treated according to the stage of the disease. If the disease is confined to the testicle, this is stage 1 disease. The treatment may be simply removal of the testicle and close observation. This is called surveillance.
But Lance had waited too long to see a doctor and lived with the swelling in his testicle for many months. During that time, his testicular cancer had long since spread. Lance was forced to come to terms with the fact that he might only have a few months to live.
Okay, take another big breath in.
If you take 100 patients who have the type of presentation that Lance had, half usually succumb from their cancer, usually within 1 or 2 years of diagnosis.
It went from bad news to worse news to even more bad news. And first he had cancer, testicular cancer. Then they found out that it had spread to his abdomen. And then it was like 2 days later, well, now it's actually in his lungs. And then it seemed like 2 days later, it's in his brain, you know. And come on, where is there a break here? Where is it going to stop?
You almost have to be a patient yourself to understand the terror of hearing the word cancer and hearing that it spread to the abdomen, spread to the lungs, spread to the brain. What's going to be involved?
Within days of the removal of Lance's cancerous testicle, doctors decided he would also need brain surgery.
I was just glad that, in my mind, that was the worst thing that I could hear, but that was going to be the last thing, the last set of bad news. I thought, I thought this doesn't get any worse than this.
It was real scary. There was a point there where I was like, well, am I going to be going to Lance's funeral?
But only a day after his brain surgery, Lance Armstrong made it clear the race was far from over.
He wanted to get out of the hospital, and he asked his doctors if he could go out to dinner. And we were just kind of, what? His head was shaved from the brain surgery and had these massive scars, and we went out to dinner with Lance.
I wanted to show my friends and my family that I was fine, that I could go out and that I was going to be okay and that I was still a normal person.
He flew to Indianapolis, where Dr. Lawrence Einhorn and Dr. Craig Nichols of Indiana University Medical Center had created a combination chemotherapy treatment program they believed would help erase Lance's cancer.
Chemotherapy is simply giving a chemical drug that kills cancer cells. Unfortunately, it is not unique as far as damage to cancer cells because it has side effects in the normal cells as well.
Cisplatinum, derived from the metal platinum, has been one of the most effective drugs in combination chemotherapy. Unfortunately, like some of the other drugs used in treating cancer, it kills any cells that reproduce, not only cancer. Hair cells, for example, which reproduce regularly, are killed off and cause a patient to lose hair. But Armstrong's physicians at Indiana University were concerned about another drug used in combination to treat testicular cancer, one that could put an end to his career forever.
One of the drugs that we use in testicular cancer is a drug called bleomycin. And bleomycin can cause some mild impairment of lung function. Again, nothing that would prevent a weekend warrior from doing normal sports activity. But Lance is not your normal weekend warrior, and he's involved in what arguably is the most grueling sport in the world. You're not going to function as a world-class cyclist if you get this degree of pulmonary impairment. So we gave him the option of substituting a different drug called ifosfamide. But for the average patient, ifosfamide causes more loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, low blood counts, susceptibility to infection, and weakness and tiredness.
But the side effects of this treatment regime were devastating. Most patients are bedridden by the severe effects of this kind of combination chemotherapy. Lance Armstrong was no exception.
I took a lot of anti-nausea drugs to combat the vomiting and the sore stomach, and it just made me sleep the whole time. It was great. I slept 20 hours a day.
If Armstrong hoped to compete ever again at the level of a professional cyclist, he had little choice but to accept the more painful side effects.
Had I taken bleomycin for 4 cycles, I would have been finished on the bike. Never would have raced again, even on a local level. Would have done major damage to my lungs. So they had awesome foresight to this kid's coming into, he's trusting you with his life, and you're trying to save his life.
He seemed to be on the road to recovery, but that wasn't enough for his French cycling team, Cofidis. The French team canceled his contract altogether, and other sponsors were turning their backs on Lance as well.
when you're winning, it's always easy. It's a piece of cake. It's great. And everything looks rosy. But when it's not good, you can tell more about the character of the athlete.
Unwilling to give up, Lance attacked his disease with the same energy he brought to cycling.
And basically his attitude was bring it on, that he very much wanted to survive his disease. If he could continue to compete as a world-class athlete, that would be a wonderful second goal, but his overwhelming number one goal was to survive his disease.
I was so nervous about the whole thing. I wanted to know as much as possible.
He set out to learn everything there was to know about cancer, strengths, weaknesses, anything that might give him the decisive edge.
He was very participatory. Like, he wanted the results of tests before they were done, and he wanted to know exactly what the next plan was.
Okay, let's grab hold of this bar here for me.
Lance's close involvement in his own treatment helped convince him that he had a fighting chance to beat the testicular cancer that plagued him. In the early months of 1997, he returned to his home in Austin, Texas, where he would continue fighting for his life with this intense chemotherapy program. Rest was prescribed, but Lance had other ideas.
We still did not know that we had cured his disease, but he was continuing to push himself almost beyond physical endurance.
There was a day we went out and we rode an hour. I mean, here he is, he's bald, he's had chemotherapy, he's lost his muscle, he's just sort of soft. We go out to ride and he can barely breathe, We had to pull over. I was so afraid I wanted to call an ambulance for him. He sat down next to his house and caught his breath for about 15 or 20 minutes. He wouldn't let me call someone, and I was so afraid for him, like his health, and that I rode with him all the way, to his house just to make sure he'd make the little descent down to his. But, he was like, no, don't worry about me, I'm fine. Just that, having a hard time catching my breath today.
Only a few months after his combination chemotherapy regimen had ended, the extent of Lance's fierce determination became apparent. His cancerous testicle had been removed. Surgery had stopped the cancer growing in his brain. Now, weeks of painful chemotherapy treatments were doing their work. The cancer was fading from his body. He was beginning the long goal he had set out for himself at the outset of his race against the disease, becoming a cancer survivor. Though making progress, Lance Armstrong was not yet cancer-free. Still, he made the decision to begin his cycling comeback, maybe prematurely.
All of the emotional stuff was totally ignored. It was like, okay, you don't have cancer anymore, let's just jump right back in here and get back on the treadmill, and he wasn't ready for it.
Before he had cancer and was racing professionally, cycling was probably one of the most important things in his life. Now, at this point, post-cancer, I don't think he was comfortable making it the most important thing in his life.
Lance's bout with cancer was shifting his life priorities. Near the end of his chemotherapy, he had become involved with a young woman he had met at a press conference in 1997.
Actually, I met Lance when he had just finished his treatment. So he had already gone through his diagnosis and his treatment, and he was to the point where he was just getting regular checkups just after the end of his chemotherapy. So he had no hair, no eyebrows, any of that, but he was still finished with his treatment.
I love it. That's my favorite picture.
Lance and Kristen soon fell in love, but the shadow of cancer continued to cloud both of their futures.
We were just pretty much going from one checkup to the next, and that was a big enough ordeal. And I think that's part of the whole process of surviving cancer, because you look at your life first in terms of just getting from one day to the next. Then as you get better checkups, you start just living from one checkup to the next. And when you get a good report, you're fine, and about a week out from your next appointment, you start to get nervous, and that's how your life goes.
But they were making plans to share a life together. A year later, Lance and Kristen were engaged and married soon thereafter. During this busy year, he also created the Lance Armstrong Foundation, an organization dedicated to raising funds for cancer research and counseling services for cancer victims.
I think that people should do whatever they can to try and help others and raise money and awareness for cancer research, and I don't know. It means a lot to me.
Meanwhile, Armstrong had reached a milestone in his battle with cancer. He had faced a 1 in 2 chance of dying. Now, his odds were improving drastically.
Now, in the world of testicular cancer, the biggest anniversary that you reach is the 1-year anniversary from starting chemotherapy, and that was October of 1997. Once you reach that 1-year anniversary, you're erasing the if, and you're not looking at a 50% chance of dying. You're looking now at only a 5% chance of dying. And now he can push goal number 1 of surviving his disease towards the bottom of his wish list and get his professional career back on track with training as a world-class cyclist.
Next on Medical Profile.
It was raining, it was cold, and he pulled over the side of the road and quit. And that was it.
You're watching Discovery Health Channel. Real life, medicine, miracles.
In 1998, Lance Armstrong was once again a cyclist with the dream of one day winning the Tour de France. But since being dropped by the French team Cofidis, few sponsors were willing to take a chance on an athlete whose body had been ravaged by cancer, surgery, and chemotherapy. One team, U.S. Postal, however, decided to take a chance. But Armstrong quickly discovered that surviving cancer was not a simple task of picking up where you left off. In his first professional race since his cancer diagnosis, he finished 11th. 2 days later, in February of 1998, he finished 20th in another race. His dream of a triumphant return was fading.
Lance thought when he came back it was all going to be the same again. So 2 days later they had a rough day out on the bike. The team didn't have a good day. It was raining, it was cold, and he pulled over the side of the road and quit. And that was it.
By the time March rolled around, he decided that he was going to retire from cycling. He didn't like it, and that was it. So we packed up and headed back to the States.
I've had a rough time in the last...
So everything just seemed sort of up in the air and crazy.
But in the spring of 1998, Armstrong and Coach Carmichael decided to give it one more go. They headed for the mountains near Boone, North Carolina. Lance had begun his career in Boone, racing and winning in the Tour DuPont, one of the premier competitions in the United States. Carmichael thought returning to Boone might strengthen his body, mind, and spirit, something that the cancer had tried to take away.
We got really unlucky with the weather. It was 40 degrees every day and raining for the entire time. I think we had 1 day of sunshine. We still went out and rode 5-6 hours a day in this freezing rain. It was really cold, really cold. And we just rode every day.
At the end of one difficult day, however, Coach Carmichael finally learned the answer to the question of whether or not Lance Armstrong was ever going to race again.
We were going to go up Beach Mountain, and it was after about 110 miles. And it had been rainy, and it was real cold. And we hit Beach Mountain, and you could just see him driving that whole way up the climb. And I remember hanging out the window and honking the horn and yelling at him and telling him, "Come on, let's go, let's go." And he was just cranking it up and got to the top, and it was probably just above freezing at that point, and it was still another 20, 25 miles home. And I said, "Oh, you want to get in the car?" And he said, "No, give me my rain jacket, I'm riding home." And I could tell something was different at that point. Something had changed.
It definitely changed everything. That 1 week in Boone changed everything.
Lance was back. The finish line seemed far, far away, but the 27-year-old was ready to race, ready to leave cancer far behind. Chemotherapy and cancer had withered his body, but in a testament to the force of willpower and discipline, he had honed his body into an aerobic workhorse that was even leaner and more efficient than before his battle with cancer.
Well, physically it changed me, my body, and changed my muscles in a good way. I mean, the weight that I lost and the way that my body almost morphed into the physique of a tour rider.
Training had to be rigorous. The Tour de France is an exhausting 3-week, 2,287-mile marathon that is one of the world's great tests of human endurance.
The Tour de France is the greatest cycling event in the world. There are more than 1 million spectators on the road to see it. Countless millions watch it on TV. It's kind of like the Super Bowl every day for 23 days.
I talked to him while he was in France and knew that he was riding, preparing for the Tour, but he'd never finished one. So I really, myself, thought, well, gee, he's really biting off a lot to attack this so soon.
On July 3rd, 1999, Armstrong began the Tour de France, just a year and a half after completing cancer treatment.
What sets the Tour above any other sport is simply the unrelenting demand on the rider. It's 22 or 23 days long. There are only 2 rest days. They're going out every day. I think the average distance is 111, 110 miles a day. The Tour riders always lose weight. They simply can't eat enough. Their bodies break down. Most of them get sick. They try to ride through flus, diarrhea, all manner of illnesses. The Tour doesn't stop.
Sort of as though you're running a marathon every day for 21 days.
In 1999, Lance surprised everyone by racing out to an early lead. But unlike most other sports, the winner of the Tour de France isn't decided in a few hours. The winner must prove himself for weeks, racing across 2 mountain ranges and French countryside. It's nearly the same as biking from New York to California. With a quarter of the race behind him, the impossible was beginning, just barely, to seem possible. He continued to wear the coveted yellow jersey, which is worn by the overall race leader. But hundreds of miles of racing still lay ahead, and he was about to take on Stage 9, the grueling ascent of the French Alps. Nowhere is the race more formidable. The Alps are where champions are made. For 100 years now, in these mountains, men have pushed their bodies beyond rational endurance.
The mountain stages shatter the Tour. Going into the mountain stages, the flats, and the time trial, some of the people in the lead won't even make it through the mountains. Really, the mountains are the first test of the Tour.
I think from other riders there was a little doubt of whether, and from the media, I think whether Lance was going to be able to climb with the best and to support the yellow jersey, to defend it.
As days of searing pain took their toll, Lance Armstrong not only survived, but made his break for immortality.
And when he attacked to bridge up to these guys, he closed this 30-second gap that these competitors had on him within 1 kilometer, within about half a mile. And which was really, it was like, beam me up, Scotty, boom, he was there.
When the exhausted cyclist descended from the switchback roads of the mountain races, cancer survivor Lance Armstrong had built an insurmountable lead. By this time, however, Lance was a veteran of even tougher battles.
One thing he said to me is that after you have cancer, it doesn't really hurt as much when you're climbing a mountain in the Tour.
And mentally and emotionally, I changed as an athlete and as a person. Somebody that was willing and able to work hard and hungrier, more focused.
On July 25th, 1999, Lance Armstrong sped across the finish line in Paris to win the biggest event in his sport, less than 2 years after beating the testicular cancer that had spread to his abdomen, his lungs, and his brain.
And that final weekend, it really was just an inspirational event. The triumphant entry through the Arc de Triomphe in Paris and down the promenade, but it just still gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
But Lance was not done. Some said that his 1999 victory was a fluke. Some of the top competitors had missed the race. 1 year later, he had the opportunity to prove them wrong.
Lance's 2000 victory in the Tour de France was great because all his chief opponents were there. On the very first mountain stage of the race, the climb, the summit finish up Hautacam, Lance kind of blew the guys away and really took control of the race at that point. And it was clear that he was the strongest climber in the race.
I mean, last year was new and a surprise for everybody, and it was a comeback. But the confirmation is sweeter.
When he won again in 2001, he became the only American to win the Tour 3 times in a row. A victory in 2002 would make this cancer survivor one of the greatest pro cyclists in history.
Lance lost a time trial in the 2002 Tour de France, but when the mountains came, Lance really came alive, and he showed that he was the strongest climber in the race and seized control in the mountains and carried that all the way through to Paris.
You know, it's mind-boggling for an American to win one Tour de France. It's mind-boggling for someone to come back from cancer and compete in the Tour de France. But to win 4 straight races like this is really an incredible story.
At 4 in a row, the world was taking notice. In the United States, cycling as a sport is virtually unknown, but that didn't stop him from bringing traffic to a halt in America's busiest city.
Gentlemen of New York City, please welcome Lance Armstrong!
Lance crossed over from being this European cycling hero to being not only a cycling hero in the United States, but a hero in the United States. I think he was pretty much blown away by the greeting he got in New York.
Throngs of fans arrived to cheer on this newly minted superstar, including cycling enthusiast Dr. Harold Varmus, the former director of the National Institutes of Health.
Just glad to be out here on the same streets with Lance, and sorry I'm not riding with him, but I'm glad to have coursed over the pavement before he did.
Lance is now an international star, but cycling is a team sport. A Tour de France champion must have a talented supporting cast.
To me, it's logical that we are successful and that we can win the Tour de France because I feel we work harder than anybody else.
The fight to eradicate cancer, too, is a battle fought by colleagues. Lance Armstrong has pledged to be a supporting player in this colossal effort, and he continues to do his part to give other cancer victims the hope and resources to win their battles with this killer disease. Next on Medical Profile.
His story is so special. Not only did he survive this illness, but he flourished afterwards.
Back in the United States, Lance would find that his victories had inspired millions of people who had never heard of the Tour de France. But more importantly, his victory as a cancer survivor gave hope to people all around the world.
I think, Lance is a hero to a lot of people, and I think that's this disease. It doesn't care who you are, and there's a point where you are hopeless, that it's just you, as your world's closing down, crashing around you, you need some hope, and Lance offers hope.
His story is about more than enduring unimaginable pain. It is about living and thriving in the wake of serious illness. And it has inspired legions of cancer survivors to put foot to pedal.
I was diagnosed in 1997 with testicular cancer. Lance Armstrong really was an inspiration to me. I saw him go through treatment, and actually, because of his treatment, realized I had cancer. After treatment, he was an inspiration to me to get back on my bike and ride.
Lance's book came out while I was in treatment, and I think that's why I got through it.
I've read Lance Armstrong's book, which has further inspired me to still stick to those long training rides and all that difficult training to give it my all, even if I don't come in first. As long as I make it to the start line, I'm already a winner. So.
With this group of cancer survivors, we did a 100-mile ride yesterday. Who would have thought? But it's very cool to be alive and to be able to ride bikes and have Lance Armstrong as a role model.
Lance wants others to avoid his fate. That means generating publicity and getting the message out. That's the job of the Lance Armstrong Foundation, and it is becoming a leader in the fight against cancer. This has made him an idol in the cancer community, and his book, It's Not About the Bike, My Journey Back to Life, has become the Bible for cancer patients.
It goes through in painstaking, agonizing detail what it's like to be a cancer patient and what it's like going through chemotherapy. And you're there in the bed with him as you read these pages, hearing the names of the drugs, hearing the side effects, knowing what Lance went through.
Lance is far from alone. Cancer levels the playing field, striking people from all walks of life. 40% of Americans will get some form of cancer. 500,000 every year will die from it, accounting for 1 out of every 4 deaths in the country. Still, there are many reasons to be optimistic. Over 8 million Americans have had cancer and survived. This is due, in part, to early detection. And Lance Armstrong is now doing as much as anybody to help get the word out.
For those of us in the medical profession, it is a way of epitomizing what can be done when one feels deathly ill. The human body and the human spirit have tremendous potential, and it's a story that we all relish because it's a way of saying to our patients, well, maybe you'll never be a Tour de France rider. I won't be, and probably most of our patients won't be, but it does show that you can get back not only to where you were, but well beyond it.
As important as Lance's contribution to the war on cancer is, it is a battle that is far from won. Part of the problem? Cancer is far more complicated than commonly understood. Lance had testicular cancer, a curable disease. Many others are terminal, with no hope of recovery.
The word cancer is literally 100 different diseases, not just originating from a different organ like the breast, the lung, the testicle, the prostate, but even different types of diseases when you look at it under the microscope and look at it at the molecular level. Now, the million-dollar question is, why can we use these drugs and cure such a high percentage of patients with testicular cancer? Yet when we have the other cancers I mentioned, we don't have the Lance Armstrong testicular cancer type of success.
Still, progress is being made. Once, surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy were the only ways to rid the body of cancer. But the process can damage many cells in the body, not just the cancerous cells. So today, doctors are experimenting with attacking cancer at its source.
There's been an explosion in knowledge of molecular biology. The discovery and the undertaking of the Human Genome Project, for example, is just a fantastic accomplishment in science. And what we hope is that we can find the molecular mysteries as to what goes wrong in a cell that causes it to go from a normal cell to a cancer cell.
Since Lance was diagnosed, scientists have located a gene, TGCT1, that makes men more susceptible to testicular cancer. This should allow the disease to be detected earlier and to be successfully treated with a less aggressive chemotherapy.
You have many pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and as you get more and more of these pieces put together, you eventually solve the entire puzzle. And it's not going to be a single drug that cures lung cancer, but it's going to be a knowledge of the molecular biology of the disease and putting these new agents together. And it's going to happen, but sadly it's not going to happen this year, maybe even this decade, maybe even in my lifetime, but it will happen in my children's lifetime. It will be solved.
But while research continues, the importance of awareness and prevention cannot be overstated. Armstrong had not heeded the early warning signs, putting his career and his life at risk. But he survived. Now he serves as a beacon of hope to millions who are in a life-and-death struggle with cancer.
I think his story is so special because of the fact that not only did he survive this illness, but he flourished afterwards. How it dramatically changed his life. It changed the way he looks at things. They want to know what it is about Lance, and they want a piece of Lance. They want that sparkle that Lance has. They want that in their life.
Next on Medical Profile.
We will never stop thinking about it. Well, there will always be checkups. There will always be that feeling of fear.